Yeah, we good? Cool. Awesome. Yay, mic works. Thanks for everybody showing up, like 11 a.m. on a Sunday, like after the con's over. Like, I'm surprised there's anybody here. Cool. So, welcome to track 2. Today we're going to be covering hacking OSX because it very clearly does not get nearly the amount of love that it deserves. So, who am I? I'm Dan. I go by Viss online. I shout a lot on Twitter. Occasionally the news, pays attention. I fly quads. I shout a lot. I hack things for a living. This is basically me. And today I'd like to introduce what I'm calling duct tape C2 or DTC2. It's basically a very poorly written, very quickly thrown together, C2 that I developed on a victim's machine during an assessment. So, I was asked to conduct an assessment that involved Mac, and there aren't a lot of tools for the Mac. So I decided to try to make one, and I am not a dev, and that's going to be very apparent. Basically, duct tape C2 is Platypus plus Bash and Python interpreter and a really, really crappy web gallery. And it's effectively like if NSA and the hacking team had sort of a test tube baby. But the first thing you'd ask is but Viss, why are you redoing work? There's all sorts of stuff. Can't you use Puppy? Can't you use Python interpreter? Can't you use any of the other wide, copious tools that are available for the Mac? To which I will respond, what? Metasploit is mainly geared towards Windows, and while there are payloads that exist for OSX that are things like Python interpreter, and you can spin off Mach-O binaries, there's not a lot of stuff you can do once you get a shell. Most of the post-exploitation stuff, some will say that yes, it does work, and others will say maybe it doesn't. In my experience on this particular assessment, and the time frame for this was just before DEF CON last year, a lot of the post-exploitation modules didn't work for me, so this is why I ended up writing this thing. Puppy didn't exist until September, which was several months afterwards, and there was another tool called Empire that was written by the guys that wrote the original Empire. Empire spelled E-M-P-Y-R-E, which is a Python version of Empire that was written specifically to target OSX. That didn't exist until maybe a month ago, so and now it's been almost a year. So basically, a media outlet named Fusion came to me and said, "We basically want you to hack a guy." And to use exactly their words, when I got on the phone with the guy that he was going to be doing this documentary, he said, "I want to see how badly you can fuck up my life." To which I sat for a moment and blinked and said, "Would you be surprised if you found me in your living room?" It was a colorful talk. So I said, "Well, okay." So step 1, gather intel, figure out who this guy is, figure out what my attack vectors are, talk to his friends, talk to his colleagues, what can I find out about this guy by just casually asking? Turns out, he's got a personal blog on Squarespace, he's your typical Apple stack user with a Mac, an iPhone, Google Apps, and two-factor authentication. He flat out asked me to hack him for the purposes of a documentary, lives in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he's heard about me and my antics potentially from our mutual friend Kashmir, who also works at Fusion. So I spent some time looking around the internet to see what sort of nuggets of intel I could find. I found some simple stuff. It was kind of scant. There's not much going on. There was some address on one of the domains he owns, but it pointed to a building that was nondescript, and there was nothing interesting going on. So there's not really a lot of options, right? So you're talking about OSX, you can't use, it's obviously not Windows. You can't use SMB, there's no WMI, there's no PowerShell. If you're on a LAN and there's a bunch of Macs on the LAN, what are you going to do? You run Nmap on the LAN, you scan for all ports, and then what? What happens if there's no ports open? What are you going to do? You really don't have a lot of entry points, right? Unless you have ODay. And I got no ODay. So, checkpoint reached, right? We take a snapshot of where we're at and what we have to do, because we reach a decision-making point where I have to figure out, all right, well, we're targeting this guy. What can we do? What do we have to do to land shell on his machine? He's a journalist. He has a blog on Squarespace. He's running an Apple stack with Google Apps and 2FA, and he knows I'm coming. So I have to put on my fuckery hat, and I have to do some shady things. So I discovered an application called Platypus. And Platypus is actually really, really crafty. I really like this tool. It'll take any script or binary that you have on your system and turn it into a .app. Now, a .app, for people that aren't Mac people, .app isn't actually a file, it's a directory, which makes it difficult to transport because if you can't drag and drop a .app into an email application. It's the same as dragging and dropping a directory. So you have to compress it or zip it, put it in, normally apps are distributed in what are called DMGs or disk image files. And that's actually pretty easy to do in disk utility in OSX. So I made this, wow, can you guys read that? I made basically a application called, I was a certificate installer, which I'll tell a story in a minute, but it was basically just Python interpreter that was wrapped using this tool to make it appear as though it was a .app, and then I put that into DMG, and that was my payload. Next, I registered a typoed version of Squarespace and stood up a blog somewhere. I paid the extra $2 for the SSL cert, and then I copy-pasted some stuff from their site, and I said, you know, hey, we're Squarespace. We take security seriously. We understand that you're a journalist and that you're you have verified accounts on both Facebook and Twitter, and we want to take security seriously for you. We want to make sure that nobody can deface your blog, and we want to make sure that nobody can mess with you. So what we're going to do here is we're going to give you these two-way SSL certs, right? So if you've ever done SSL work, you can have what are called client-side certificates. And client-side certificates basically mean that the SSL connection won't be established unless the client has a very specific cert. So the pretext here was, take these certs. You know, the internet is dangerous, and we want to make sure that your blog doesn't get defaced. So install these certs, and the only people that can touch your blog are these. Yeah, the only people that can touch your blog are the people that have this cert. So you can distribute the cert, or you can keep it to yourself, whatever you want to do. But you know, this is just an added layer of security because you're an interesting person on the internet. So I had basically the same language on this site and the same language in the email. Lob the email in, 15 minutes later, you know, I get my first shell. And that's what it feels like, right? For everybody that's in the room that's done this sort of work, anybody that's done red team pen test type stuff, the first shell that you get is always just like nerve-wracking. You're sweating bullets. You send the email, you lob your payload, and you're like, shell, and you're like, yes! It's every time you're like, yes! However, you know, interpreter session 1 open. Fuck yeah, I got a shell. What now? It's a Mac. None of my post-exploit shit works. Nothing. Like, right? I'm like, right? So this is me on this Mac, and I'm like, okay, you know, no Mimikatz, no keylog, no webcam, no interpreter, no pivoting, no automated persistence, nothing. Like, all the cool shit that we use for Windows just doesn't exist. And I was like, just, really? I have to do everything by hand? Fine. So after putting the shell down and doing a whole crap ton of Googling and looking around, I realized that, okay, so Macs don't really have cron. That's partially true. Like, technically speaking, you can turn cron on Macs, but it requires root, which means you have to have creds, and it's kind of a pain. It's a lot easier to use plists, and plists are effectively XML documents that are used to modify and control what you could arguably call the Mac's registry. It's not registry like Windows has a registry. It's basically like, it's called launch control, and launch control is sort of this daemon that runs, and it does various things. So you can take a document like this, and you can say, hey, run this shell script every 300 seconds, and you lob that into launch control, and it's like adding a cron job. Now you have a cron job basically inside of a Mac saying, do this every 5 minutes. Which you think, this is awesome, I'm never gonna, this is perfect persistence. No, nobody's gonna notice this because who even knows about launch control, right? Who looks at this stuff other than like Patrick Wardle and maybe a couple other people that are actually like doing OSX forensics and OSX backend stuff. Few people even know that this exists. So you think, wow, that's awesome. Like, I'm good. I got persistence for days. Sort of. As it turns out, if you have like 600 Python interpreter shells on a Mac, Python starts to break. And I'm not entirely certain how, but it starts throwing these bizarre I/O errors. So my first big problem was that, okay, I successfully compromised the machine, I successfully got persistence, but having a shell phone home every 5 minutes for several days means that you go to bed at like midnight, 1, 2, 3 in the morning, you get up at 9 and there's like several hundred, maybe several thousand shells waiting for you. Now that's great because, you have 1,000 shells to choose from, but the stability of the machine that you're sitting on starts to waver, and your victim is going to know that something's up if suddenly the machine quits responding and they do a PS listing and they see like 40 pages of Python. So the next step was like, all right, what do I do? Like, how do I manage this? So I basically had to like figure out a way to manage dealing with hundreds and hundreds of shells at phone home all the time. Sadly, none of the tools that exist today support the functionality of shell phones home. Mothership says, there's 500 of you, go away. And that shell goes, oh, sorry, okay, and disconnects. Like, that doesn't exist. So, it's a great feature request. I should probably lob in, but yeah, so I had to do this by hand. So what I did was, I created a second plist, right? So I had one plist that fired like once an hour for the remote shell, and then I kept the other 5-minute plist for other things. And those other things actually turned out to be pretty colorful and pretty interesting. So, the short version is you can get this from a Mac. And I thought to myself, like, that's really interesting. Like, I had no clue you could get GPS coordinates off of a Mac. They don't have GPS. How do you do that? That's pretty rad. I'll get into it. So sixth, scale is a problem again. If you're taking webcam pictures and desktop screenshots from somebody every 2 minutes or every 5 minutes forever, you end up, in a day or two, you end up with a directory of thousands and thousands of images. What do you do with that? Like, other than, you creep on somebody, that's fine, but like, how do you view those? Like, now you're like, well, crap, now I have to have like a web gallery or some kind of software to be able to parse all these images and sort them in the right way. So, I found this crap web gallery that's being distributed right now with DTC2, that it's great if you have several hundred pictures, but the minute you hit like 800 or 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000, then you load the gallery and it takes like 5 minutes to load just because the JavaScript and the PHP on the back end that's building the gallery is just super slow and horribly not optimized. Like, there's way better ways to do this. I'm not a dev though, so I have no idea what I'm doing. So seventh, once you get on a machine, once you have shell, there's some pretty shady and / amazing things you can do. So there's this glorious thing called OSScript. And OSScript is kind of like PowerShell, but it's designed to be very like plain Englishy to work with the OSX types. And for example, and there's examples in the GitHub repo that I'll be linking. You can this is a screenshot of me telling 1Password to pop a dialog box that says, like, this is horribly broken. Like, the icon is the 1Password icon, but it says software update requires you to type your password. Like, I just did this for the sake of the screenshot, but like, you can make this thing say anything you want. Like, the header and the text in the window, you can make it's completely arbitrary. So OSScript is pretty powerful. If you have shell on somebody's machine, it's trivial to phish the user again once you have a shell on the machine to get whatever you need. So this is the command line output, right? So you run my crappy little shell script that runs the OSScript, and then the button returned okay, text returned, and then just like garbage, right? So this is what you see on the command line, and you're not going to see the GUI maybe unless you're taking screenshots really fast, but this is what you expect to see as the attacker. All right, so last and final component is like, well, now that we have all of this stuff, and now that we have all of this capability on a Mac, what can we do with it? So the first thing that I did was discover that there is an airport command. There's a binary called airport on a Mac. It's buried like 15 directories deep. I don't have the path, sadly, but you can Google for it. When you type the airport command, I think it's airport-s, it will do exactly what you would expect if you were to click on the airport icon or the Wi-Fi icon on a Mac. It shows you all the SSIDs that are visible, right? So, is there anybody in the room that had an iPhone like 8 years ago before they had GPS? No? Maybe? You guys have any idea how GPS was happening before there was GPS? Yeah, it's Wi-Fi triangulation. So basically turns out you can do this on a Mac, which I'll get to, but like I was doing this by hand. So if you want to find out where somebody is and you have access to their machine, you look at what SSIDs are visible. And then you can go to wiggle.net and you can say, here's the MAC address. Show me where things are. And I'm told actually yesterday that you can use the API for this, which makes it a lot easier. Wiggle is great for finding these networks, and it'll tell you like, hey, I found these networks, and this is the physical location of where they are. The trouble is that the map view, when you go to Wiggle, is like, it's literally one blue pixel. So you're looking at Google Maps, and you have to find one blue pixel. It's ridiculous. But in this case, I knew what city the guy was in, so I was able to zoom in a bit. But yeah, once you have SSIDs you can look for, Wiggle.net is a database. It's a free public database of war drivers. And there's people at Con here that are walking around with Wiggle just running on their phones. And what they're doing is they're logging GPS coordinates. I mean, basically war driving, right? So you have like opt-in war driving. So you can, Wiggle.net is the free, anybody can use this version, but you can do that by hand, right? So if you have shell on a machine and you can get SSIDs out of it, then you can narrow down to like within a block or so of where somebody is, which is really neat. So, exfiltration, generally a pretty good time. Like, despite Meterpreter not having a lot of post-exploit modules, the upload and download functionality is perfectly fine. It works great. So this is me downloading huge chunks of his Dropbox. And then you can see at the bottom here, I added myself a user. That was really handy for additional persistence. I created a tunneling script, which is in the repository, that allows you to have like a persistent reverse SSH port forward. So you have an SSH daemon or an SSH client on this machine, phone home somewhere to like a VPS and do a reverse port forward. So you SSH into that VPS and there's a port open there, and you SSH into that port and you're on the Mac. So it bypasses firewalls and things like that. Then grabbing keychains. This is really important. Grab the system and the login keychains, because they're encrypted with the user's password. And if you can phish the user using OSA script, you can grab their password, then you can decrypt all the login keychain. The login keychain is like, it's like a vault key, right? So you have one password, and you can use that one password to decrypt every password they have stored in the system. All the Wi-Fi passwords, all the browsers, passwords that have been saved in the browser and things like that. And then I was recommended from a friend of mine who does development work that you can actually do like straight up GPS on a Mac using core location service. And I was like, wait, what? And he says, well, core location service on the iPhone and how that was working before iPhones had GPS? And I said, yes. And he says, well, core location is an API and that exists in OSX as well. And I said, awesome. So actually I have a demo of this real quick. But yeah, basically we can get like straight up GPS. And we're in a building and there's like concrete above us, but I'm going to get GPS of where we are. Like, hopefully it'll work. So a quick demo. Let's see here. Is that big enough? Just a bit bigger. Oh, that works. Okay, here we go. Just stop. Okay. So, here we go. Sorry. All right, so here we go. We have GPS coordinates here. Copy. Come on, internet. Really? Come on. Aha. So, is it going to drop me a pin? So we are, oh, it did drop me a pin right there. So this is with no GPS. Like just Wi-Fi alone in a building at a con, like this is what you can do from the command line. So the binary that I'm using is a custom compiled binary from an example piece of code that's in the repository. So basically the tricky part with this though is it will ask the user for input. Unless they have like blindly opened location services. Like some people actually have location services just turned on and you can do whatever. But the first time you run this on a machine, it'll actually say like, in this case, a.out wants permission to use location services. So, you know, expect that the user will do that. So if you want to really be what do you call it? OPSEC-y about it, then I would suggest using something like Platypus to wrap this binary and give it an icon and make it look like Google Chrome or make it look like something else that typically asks for GPS coordinates. Wrap it that way, and then you'll have a better chance of success. So, and in terms of like basically surveillance, I'm fairly certain that the NSA and the hacking team people got it right with doing desktop screenshots and webcam pictures rather than just like hanging out in a shell all day. Because holy crap, you get some rich data out of screenshots and webcam pictures. It's amazing. I got more intel from just watching this guy's desktop than I ever have on any other gig in my entire life from a shell. Like, it's just ridiculous. So, like, to give you an example, like, I can just watch the guy. I know if he's at his computer. I know where he is. I know what he looks like. I know how he dresses. I know where he goes. I get GPS coordinates off his Mac. I have pictures of him sending and receiving emails. And in this case, since he's a producer of a documentary, there's like some pre-release video that they wanted him to approve. And they sent him a link to a Vimeo page for the video, and the password is password. So I'm like, oh, rad. This documentary is not going to come out for like 8 months or 6 months or something like that, but I can watch a pre-release episode because you can't do that with a shell, right? Here's like more, this is me, again, just screenshots of me like grabbing his chat with Kashmir over Slack and grabbing emails that get sent to him. At one point, like, if you're familiar with Mac, you can use the say command to get the Mac to say things. And like, he's sitting, I guess it wasn't here, it was actually earlier that night. He was sat at a table in a living room somewhere, and he looked bored out of his mind. So I made his Mac say, hey man, you look bored, and he nearly shit his pants. Like, I guess his volume was all the way up, and I was like, hey man, your laptop is telling you look bored. You're like, what the fuck is going on? So he's writing an email to Kashmir saying like, my laptop told me I look bored. And I was keeping her informed on the back end and showing all this screenshots and stuff that I was doing. So she was like, oh man, I'm not spoiling anything, but god damn it, he's turned you inside out. So it's a pretty good time. But like, in terms of OPSEC related stuff, like, can anybody tell me what's going on in this photo if you presume that these, the screenshot and the webcam picture were taken at exactly the same time? Just shout. That's right. Dude left his machine unlocked and unattended in a public place. So it's interesting to learn, like, you'd never ever learn that if you just had a shell. Ever. There's no way you'd ever know. I mean, you could probably do some like, look at the keyboard and see if he's at the keyboard and typing, and then like get GPS coordinates, and maybe you can see, oh, he's in a coffee shop somewhere, but like the keyboard hasn't been touched in 2 minutes. So maybe he's in the bathroom, maybe he's left it unattended, or maybe he's just on the phone. Right? But you'd never know. Like, the only way you can find this out is by doing this. So it's really, really, really rich intel. But my absolute favorite, oh god, this is the best. An email to me that begins with the words, oh fuck. Perfect. But yeah, so TLDR, screenshots, webcam pictures, like, holy crap, super, super, super rich data. If you can get this on a gig, do it. So, I'm pretty sure 1Password got rid of this because I was actually trying to get a bunch of the stuff to get a demo working for this presentation. But 1Password used to distribute a thing called 1Password Anywhere if you were to sync 1Password to Dropbox. Now what that would do is, like, let's say you have your main computer and you're away, or your main computer is like in your luggage or something like that, or you do something other, hacker folk would tear their hair out and think was crazy. But you need to get at your fancy 30-character passwords. But maybe you have your phone or you have a public computer. So you log into Dropbox, and Dropbox, since you're syncing 1Password to the Dropbox, your 1Password database lives in this directory inside of Dropbox. Now, in that directory, there's a file called 1Password.html, and that will run some JavaScript crypto, and the JavaScript crypto will allow you to have a read-only access to that database. So, if you OSA script somebody, like you fish them with this, and you get their 1Password credential, then you can log into their 1Password instance through 1Password anywhere. And at that point, you have everything they have in 1Password. And in this case, one of the first things I found was he had Dropcam. And I didn't know that before. Dude has Dropcam. And this is another sort of, why on earth would you trust a webcam, like a security surveillance cam system that sends all your shit to the cloud? Because, like, this can happen. Like, somebody gets your credentials to Dropcam, now they have access to all your surveillance camera and all your backlog and all your data. Like, all these little stripes are like recorded movement and recorded events. Like, I could go through his backlog of all the stuff that his camera recorded at his house. I'm like, oh, this is great. So I had Kashmir go to his house with a big sign that says Viss says hi and hold it up for the camera. That was pretty good. We rolled it up and left it at his house for him. There's a bunch of other stuff as well. Like, we were able to do this because, in addition to Dropcam being in 1Password, there was a bunch of other stuff in there, like, social security numbers and driver's license numbers and like credit card numbers and all this other extra stuff that's handy to have in a place where you can copy paste it if you need it. But it was kind of a bloodbath. I logged into PayPal to get his shipping address so that I could figure out where his house was, and that's how I got Kashmir to go to his house. So, you know, this was all basically from just doing 2 levels of fishing. The first fish got me a shell, the second fish got me his creds. And then once I had his creds, I literally had every piece of information and intelligence that I needed to successfully impersonate him to anybody, including government officials, the DMV. I could have remortgaged his house. I could have bought a plane. I could have, like, you name it. Like, for all intents and purposes, I could completely be him on the internet. So, in hindsight, so some things went really well and other things did not go really well at all. But in hindsight, there are some sort of do's and don'ts for attacking Macs and generally staying sort of stealthy in these sort of operations, specifically when you're dealing with Macs. So scale matters, right? If you have too many shells, you're going to have problems. If you capture too much data, you're going to have problems. So anticipate having a way to deal with all of the data that you're exfiltrating from the victim, I guess. And that's more than just, you know, shells and stuff you download. I'm talking about, like, if you end up with a directory of 6,000 photos, make sure that those 6,000 photos aren't publicly available to anybody that happens to stumble across the directory. Like if the dude decides, oh, this is a weird thing, I'm going to go back and look at this thing, and he realizes it's a fish, you might want to take the extra time to make sure that it's like wrapped in SSL or has sitting behind HT access or in some way is more obfuscated so he doesn't like, because there's going to be this pants shitting moment where you realize that you've been phished, right? And you go to this URL and you log into this page or whatever, you browse to it, and directory indexing is conveniently turned on, and you see a directory of like 7,000 photos, and you click on one, and it's you from 2 days ago picking your nose. Like, that's one of those immediate like pants shat moments. Like, you go from, oh, this is really interesting to in like 10 seconds. Right? So, bit of OPSEC, right? Make sure that whatever you're collecting can't easily be found. And then to that end, like, and this is something I'm hoping is a sort of a feature that we can build into Duct Tape C2, is that there's some sort of obfuscation with the attack side of things. Like, Duct Tape C2 or DTC2 at the minute is literally just a pile of shell script. It's all plain text. It's all English. Like, anybody with a clue who's ever used curl or SSH will look at these files and be like, I know exactly what's going on here. So some level of obfuscation or some way of wrapping, or maybe it can be rewritten in Go or something to make it binary so that it's a little harder to dig into. Would probably be a really good thing. Also, Let's Encrypt didn't really exist back when I did this gig last summer. So now you can literally wrap everything in SSL for free, and I strongly suggest doing that. Because in the event that your payloads are caught, or in the event like somebody decides to ask questions, you can say like, yep, it was all written in SSL, nothing was transmitted clear text, there was no leakage of information of any kind. But that's more of a cover your ass kind of quasi business insurance kind of thing to do. So, but I mean, it's good, right? If you're good, you get hired to do these things, you're above board, you're doing the white hat thing. This gives clientele peace of mind. You make sure everything's wrapped in SSL. So as far as expansion goes, you can use DTC2 as a dropper for whatever, because the intention here is that you can take, using using Platypus, you can take anything, scripts, binaries, whatever, and wrap them with platypus and turn them into a .app. So really, you can say, okay, first launch me a puppy, or I guess I actually asked the dev, it's pronounced poopy, but it's PUPY, I guess is the name of the tool. And it's specifically designed to spin off binaries. It's like a post-exploit command and control. But it's not really, its intention is not surveillance. DTC2 is built for surveillance. Metasploit and Poopy and Empire are all post-exploit like operations, right? So nobody's doing post-exploit surveillance other than basically hacking team. So this can be used as a dropper for dropping additional shells. So, in a best case scenario, your victim runs the payload and you get 3 different shells to 3 different CNCs. So that's just something to consider. So, and yes, I did ask, and yes, apparently it's pronounced poopy. All right, it's poopy. So, that being said, I have, thanks to C. Nelson for explaining that core location service can actually be used on Macs proper. That was really, really, really helpful. Fuzzy Nop is the guy that came up with all of the OSAScript stuff. I suggest you guys check out his blog. He's got pages and pages of write-ups on OSAScript and sort of the crazy, crazy malicious amazingness you can do with that. And the Colonial for sanity checking my crap code and helping me get all the architecture all set up so that things function properly. And obviously, thank you, Kevin, for letting me splash around in your life like a kid in a puddle. So that being said, I went a little fast. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody want to throw a knife at me? I'll open it up to you guys. We got like 25 minutes. Oh, go for it. The documentary is already out. It's on YouTube. It's called Fusion Real Future. And if you search for, Fusion Real Future, I'm in episode 8, which is titled Hacking or something like that. But yeah, it's already published. So the question was, did my victim ask me questions about the download link for the purposes of the documentary, or did he just run it blindly and not know that it was me? I'm not 100% sure. He never gave me a direct answer. I did ask him about other secondary things. Like I asked him, do you remember 1Password giving you any bizarre login prompts or anything like that? And he said no. I said, do you remember your system asking you for updates in any bizarre, interesting way? And he said no. So the second layer of phishing, apparently he didn't even notice. But I don't think that he did. He may have, I'm not sure. I didn't ask. It's entirely plausible that he let it run for the purpose. I mean, think of it this way. If he didn't run the thing, then there wouldn't be much of a documentary, would there? So there's that to consider. So maybe he was just placating me, I'm not sure. But, yeah. Did that answer your question? Okay. Anyone else? Mm-hmm. Okay, so the question was, how did I get into his keychain, basically operationally? So the keychains are just files, right? So you can just download them like any other file. When you try to run them on your Mac, what it'll do is, if you go into Keychain, the Keychain Manager, Keychain Access on your Mac, it will attempt to add it as another keychain in the list on the left. And if you try to access it, it will give you a little dialog box that pops up and asks you for password. And if you enter the correct password, it just shows you their keychain just like it would show you your keychain. So basically what you're doing at that point is you're importing their keychain onto your computer. Sorry. Yep. Did I have a backup if the initial phishing didn't work? Not really. Like, this was sort of quasi-unknown territory. I mean, the plan B is always like, when you're doing these gigs and you actually have, like a proper, like, no-scope red team assessment on the books, then it's sort of anything goes, and including like flying to their city and going to their office. Like typically, if the client is a customer, or like a customer, like if the client is a business, they have a physical office, right? And they have multiple employees, so you have a lot of different avenues of approach. In this case, it was one guy. So I had a couple of other potential ideas. One of them was maybe calling him and trying to talk to him on the phone and seeing if I could get him to click a link. But as it turns out, there are ways to make emails look very attractive. And even if they don't initially click a link, there's ways you can put like anchors in emails that will tell you if they view the email or if they've, if you're running the machine that's got the payload on it and it's yours, you can just tail the Apache log and see if they click the thing. Because, it could be, column A is he looks at the email, dismisses it as spam, never looks at it again. Well, I'm boned. The option B is like he looks at the email, but he doesn't click the link, right? And then option C is he looks at the email and he clicks the link, but then he doesn't run the payload, right? So there's all these different possible ways that it could have panned out. So generally that sort of plays into you do a lot of OSINT and a lot of recon on the people you're going to be phishing to try to make the most enticing possible email, right? So I ran Twitter's anti-phishing program for a year, and I found through all the internal training that we did that the most effective way to get somebody to click a thing is to appeal to their vanity. We had three different campaigns that we did every week at Twitter, and the first one was something like, do this or you lose VPN access. The second one was, you've been qualified to have a verified Twitter profile. And the third was, we're switching insurance carriers, and if you don't fill this thing out, you're going to lose your health benefits. And by far and away, the Twitter verification email was the biggest, gnarliest one. Because despite every single Twitter employee being told face-to-face, like, you're an employee, you don't qualify for being verified, that went in one ear and out the other. They literally just ignored that part of the training. So, go figure. But, yeah, so take the time to get to know the people that you want to own, and you'll have a lot easier time owning them. In the case of, if it was a Windows machine, there's a lot of different ways you can send them a payload. There's a lot of different things you could do. On a Mac, it's fairly limited, but again, unless you have like layer 2 adjacency or unless you have some sort of ODE or something, pretty much your only way in is like phishing or drive-by downloads or some kind of like man in the middle, right? You're very, very limited. It's client-side attacks only. So, yeah. But to answer your question, no, I didn't really have a defined plan B, but I had like the sort of very small cornucopia of options to choose from. Anybody else? No? All right, well, I will give you guys back 19 minutes of your life. Thank you very much.